This is where our three phases of know yourself, choose yourself, and give yourself. This is where this idea comes from, and we're going to dive into those a little bit. We start off with this picture of an iceberg, and this is a really important concept because we need to understand that when we see people's behaviors, when your kids were at home and you were seeing their behaviors, that was just the tip of the iceberg, the proverbial tip of the iceberg. And there's so much going on underneath. And so emotional intelligence is one way that we look at that. And so is DISC, and so is our Arbinger material, the anatomy of peace, and leadership and self-deception. These are all of the ways. And then, of course, the overriding principle of the spiritual truth and reality, those concepts become very good. So when we look at emotional intelligence, and really when we look at our students, we see that their behavior is just the tip of the iceberg. And we want to get in today to talk a little bit about what is emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence, and I don't know if you can see there's a little EQ on this slide. I know it didn't print super well. But we want to understand what is emotional intelligence. And that may not be a term that you've heard real often, but it's kind of a core concept. So what EQ is not. Emotional intelligence, raising your emotional intelligence, it's not being nice. It's not being overly emotional. We're not looking for kids that cry or laugh or all the time or things like that. It's talking more about our personality, how we relate to other people. And sometimes, it's not talking about personality. It's going to talk more about how we relate to other people. And it is not the opposite of IQ. So it's not that you have, and this is what the next slide says, it's not that we have a thinking brain and we have an emotional brain. And for a long time, this dominated Western thought, that you were either logical or you were emotional. And that these two things were separate and they didn't join together at all. And what we learned with emotional intelligence is that we need to learn how to think when we're feeling. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. But we need to learn to think when we're feeling. So this is kind of our working definition. Emotional intelligence is effectively blending thinking and feeling as we make decisions. Now, when we teach this concept and we talk about this with your students, if all they walked away with was just an understanding of this statement, things would be dramatically different in how they made decisions. I also work in a church. I think most of you know that. If I could get just my congregation to understand this stuff, the adults in my congregation to understand this statement, I think we would deal with a lot less of the petty issues that we deal with in our churches about people's personalities and what color to paint the walls and what color the carpet should be and who should be. Anyways, I could go on and on. This is not about me, though. Okay, so this is the goal of emotional intelligence, is to blend thinking and feeling as we're making decisions. Now, most teenagers, and I would even probably say most adults, but most teenagers, when they make decisions, it's all about what did I feel like a half a second ago. So something happens. There's this catalyst event, and they feel something, and they respond to it, and they go. So if you think back to the things that you were looking with at home, your son or daughter came to you with requests, and they asked you, can I something or something? And you said no. Okay, and they felt something, and we'll talk about the whole spectrum of emotions in a minute. But they felt angry, they felt sad, they felt hurt, they felt insulted, they felt overly happy because you said yes, or whatever it was. And then they started making decisions based on that feeling instead of stopping to think about, okay, what's the right thing for me to do? So we want to be able to blend these two ideas, and obviously wisdom, wise decisions, is a very, very biblical concept. And so they have these three phases, these three ideas that come together to help us be able to do this. And this is where our three phases come from. So know yourself, choose yourself, and give yourself. Now all of this, we'll talk about this, all of this comes from an organization called the 6 Second Institute. And a little bit we'll talk about what is the significance of 6 seconds and why that's so important. There's some really, really powerful ideas that come out of that. But each of these, so know yourself is about increasing awareness, understanding who you are. And I will tell you that this is a very, very challenging thing. If all our students did was come in and gain some level of mastery with know yourself, they would be ahead of 90% of the teenagers in the world, I think. Certainly 90% of the teenagers in Western America. I'll say Australia too. I've never been there, but I'm going to assume that it's true. So, and by the way, if you guys fall asleep, that's okay, because I understand right now your bodies are going, man, it's late. So that's perfectly fine. I won't be insulted. But I will a little, but I'll get over it. Choose yourself Then, know yourself is about increasing awareness. Choose yourself is about becoming more intentional. Okay, so beginning to make these decisions with some thinking process. And then give yourself is about connecting with your deep sense of purpose. And this is our third phase. It's about connecting with your deep sense of purpose. And obviously, when you start talking about deep sense and purpose, we've clearly transitioned from the seen to the unseen. We've clearly transitioned from the physical to the spiritual. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Underneath each of these ideas, there are 8 competencies. So in our Know Yourself competency, we want, what we're looking for on your first phase students, when they're ready to transition from first phase to second phase, we want them to be able to enhance their emotional literacy. Now that is a fancy, schmancy way of saying we want them to be able to talk about what's going on inside of them. I truly, truly believe that most teenagers, when they are acting out, when they are making negative decisions, if you ask them, why are you doing this? What do they say back to you? I don't know. I believe them. I don't think they know. I think they are dealing with these emotions and hurts and pains and disappointments that are surrounding them, that Satan has used our culture to surround them with, and they are making decisions responding to that, and they've never stopped to think about, why am I doing this? Because very rarely, and you guys can account for this, right? Very rarely do our sons or our daughters ever make a wrong decision and go, well, I didn't know that was wrong. Now, they may say that to you, but our response is, you didn't know that was wrong? You really didn't know that you shouldn't steal stuff from the store? You really didn't know that you shouldn't sleep with your boyfriend? You really didn't know that you shouldn't punch holes in walls? You really didn't know that we wouldn't approve of marijuana? I mean, whatever it may be, they certainly knew it. So I don't know, or I wasn't sure, is their way of saying, I really didn't know. So when we talk about this idea of increasing emotional literacy, what we want is our students to be able to talk about what's going on underneath the surface. Most of them can identify the top of the iceberg. We want them to be able to talk about it. So, well, and then the second piece of that is being able to recognize their patterns. So when I was talking with you, Mom and Dad, and you said this phrase, when you said, we look at your brother, your older brother, and he's done so well, and maybe you said, maybe you've never said this, maybe you've said, why can't you be more like him? Or maybe you've made the mistake of saying, why can't you be more like the other kids? Or maybe you've gone even a step further, why can't you be more like the normal kids? Whatever that means. I have yet to meet a normal teenager. But we start to say, okay, so when you said this, or when I was with my friends, and I was hanging out with my friends, and we went shopping, and they're all buying, for girls, right? They're all buying the size 2s and the size 0s, and I had to buy the size 6. I noticed that then I started feeling like I wasn't good enough. And then I came home, and I had to talk to you about how I hadn't done well in school, and that increased that. And then I really just wanted to go do something that made me feel better. So I went and smoked with my friends, or I snuck out, or I decided I was going to have a fight with you. I was going to be defiant to you. Or I said I was going to go, sleep with my boyfriend or my girlfriend. Or I, not decided, because it wasn't like they thought, what can I do now that I'm... It just but being able to recognize it and talk about it and understand those things. Can you imagine having that conversation with your son or daughter? Just to be able, and you will. That's the amazing thing, is you will have that conversation. And so when we get ready, when they come to the panel, which we talk about, right? There's a panel from each phase, and the panel, if you're not familiar with this process, is they have some tangible things that they have to accomplish. They have some measurable things, reading some books, things they have to get done in academics, a certain amount of meetings that they have to take. If you don't know what that means, ask your son or daughter, what does it mean to take a meeting? And they'll explain that to you. They have to do these things, and you can check them off the list. Those are very tangible. And when they've done that, they put it all together in a binder. And ask your son or daughter if they're getting close to panel to see their binder. It's really, they may not share it with you because there's a lot of personal stuff in it, but they may want to share some of those things with you. Writing a life story is part of that too. So then they turn that binder in, and then they, once it's accepted, they'll go through it. All of the check-offs have been done, and then they'll come to a panel. And that panel is going to be where they're going to sit down with 3 or 4 of their peers and 1 or 2 staff. And their staff are going to talk to them, and the peers are going to, mostly their peers are going to talk to them, and they're going to ask them questions about what they've learned about themselves. It's phase 1. How do you know yourself? They're going to ask them, talk about your patterns. Explain them. Explain the core issues that are going on in you. What are the lies that you believed about yourself, and how did that lead to the behavioral choices that you were making at home, the behavioral choices that you've made as you struggled at the academy? And here's why that's critical, is because as they're transitioning from first phase to second phase, and you sit down and you start family restoration with them, the very first session that your guys are going to all sit down and talk about is, what are our patterns? What are the lies that we've believed about ourselves that led to our negative behavior? And you notice I said R, because you guys get to do it too. So now you don't want your students. No, I'm just kidding. So you're going to be able to talk about it too. You're going to need to have that opportunity to talk about it. Because we're not exempt from this process. We're part of it too. And that's one of the things that I think makes ALA unique as compared to maybe some of the other options that are out there, is we do look at the whole family in its entirety. So then we move on to Choose Yourself, and that's going to be our second phase work. So in Choose Yourself, what we want our students to be able to do now is really understand consequential thinking. When I, and then this happens. Or when I feel this, then I do this, and then this happens. Or being able to put, A plus B equals C, and understand that thing. And being able, and I often will tell students when they successfully panel from first phase to second phase, when I was staff that was running those, I would say, come back in for their panel, they'd leave, and then everybody would talk about it, and we'd vote, yes or no, and then they'd come back in, and so if they made it, I would say, I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is, you made it, you're on second phase. The bad news is, you can't say, I don't know anymore, because now you just demonstrated that you do. So now if you decide that you're not going to do school for a couple of days, and somebody says, why don't you want to do school today? You can't get away with, I don't know. Because then if I had a student say that to me, I'd say, well, maybe you need to go back to first phase, which really quickly motivated them to, no, we want to get this thing out. So consequential thinking, being able to say, when I feel this, then I do this, then I go. We want to be able to navigate through their emotions. Okay, so when I get really, really angry, or get really, really sad, what can I do with that? How can I disrupt these patterns that I've seen in myself? We want to see them move into some intrinsic motivation in second phase. Now, I don't expect this to happen on the first day that they're on second phase, and suddenly go, man, I so want to do the things that God wants me to do, and I'm so motivated for my life because now I'm on second phase. No, this is part of the learning process through second phases. We want them to now be making decisions because they're good, wise decisions to make. Not because they're afraid of getting in trouble or not paneling or disappointing parents or disappointing whoever. And then the other things that we see in them that's really, really important is we see a sense of optimism. And if you want to see a really easy to identify transition, if you can just play this game with yourself today when you're at lunch as you're talking with different students, because you'll be interacting with different students and such. Look at the students that have a sense of optimism, and I would almost guarantee you that either their parents are here or they're on second or third phase. You'll really, really see that. They'll talk about my future. They'll talk about when I get out of here. They'll talk about what's going to happen. They'll talk about what I'm working on. And you'll see that sense of optimism. So just as you're meeting them, don't ask them right away. Now, some of them are so conditioned, they'll be like, hi, I'm Shawn, I'm on second phase, I'm from California. Like, that's how they introduce themselves, so you might not be able to do it. But if you can get away with it, let them do it, and then try to see, and you'll really be able to identify that thing. Then the third phase is this idea of give yourself. And this is where all of the work that they've done on first and second phase takes root. And this is where you say, okay, now that I am comfortable in my own skin, I know who I am, I have this passion, this desire, this purpose to help other people do the same thing. And so most of your students will identify a late second phaser or third phaser student who's helping them along. They'll say, when I'm struggling, I'll go and I'll sit down with, and they'll say somebody. And it's almost always a second or third phase student. And then on this third phase, what we want them to do is to be able to develop empathy. We'll develop that idea a little bit more. And then the pursuit of noble goals. And this is a really, really big thing for teenagers. It is for adults too. When I sit down and I'm doing some spiritual counseling with adults, most of them don't have noble goals. They don't know how to see them in their life. But if we help to understand this concept, if we help them understand this concept, what we can see is that even in our students' negative behaviors, there was probably some noble goals that they can now move into the forefront of their mind. Some of your students were fiercely loyal to friends who they shouldn't have been fiercely loyal to. Loyalty is a noble thing. There's not a single one of us who I said, do you want your kids to be loyal? Yes, absolutely. To what? Well, we want to be loyal to good things. We want to be loyal to the Lord. We want to be loyal to, to their family. Some of your friends or some of your students had an incredible drive. Now, when it was negative, we called that being stubborn, right? But when we move that over and say, some of them are going to be able to not give up. They don't care what people. I have a daughter that's this way. She's 5 years old, and she does not care what anyone thinks of her. And now, sometimes that frustrates me because I want her to care what I think sometimes, and she doesn't. But I know, and I'm trying to seed in her, and I try to seed in my parents who that really bothers them as grandparents. Like, They want something else. I don't know what it is, but I'm trying to seed in the people that are around her and are speaking into her life that I want her to never lose that quality. I just want to make sure that the things she's committed to are godly things. Because I want a 15-year-old daughter 10 years from now who says and looks at a boy and says, I don't care what you think of me. I'm not doing that. Don't say whatever you want, spread whatever rumors you want. I don't care. That's where she is right now. So I want that to stay. That's a noble thing. So this is kind of how we go with this concept. So then we come and there's going to be these 3 questions that we're going to look at. So when we start to consider phase 1, this emotional intelligence, what am I feeling? And then as we get to the other 2, it'll be what options do I have, and what is my empathetic or principled choice? So knowing yourself is about self-awareness. It's about learning how we typically react, recognizing patterns, and then the language of emotions. The Bible speaks about this. In Romans 12 it says, For by the grace given to me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you should, but rather consider yourself with sober judgment, in accordance with the measure of faith that God has given you. This is, I think, one of the most difficult things for us to do as Christians. And I would even add to that kind of as a Western Christians, is that we do not like to look at ourselves. Most of us are so busy, and us, I'm saying just all of us in the whole society, we are so busy and moving so fast. And I think one of the reasons is because we don't want to slow down and take a minute and actually have to look at ourselves in the mirror. And Paul writes in Romans that by grace, he can say this, that we should take time to consider ourselves, to consider what's going on. And look at the last part of the verse, in accordance with the measure of faith that God has given you. So to us as parents, can I just take a moment and say that according to our faith, will we be able to look at ourselves? And no matter how much of an influence ALA, any staff member at ALA may have, you are still the most important influence in your kid's life. Even at this time, you are still the most important. And I promise you, and I've seen this happen before, that you get to that first restoration session where we are going to talk about our patterns, where we are going to talk about our core beliefs or our struggles that we've had in the past, our. And I've gotten to that where I have parents and the son or daughter will open up and they'll pour all of these things out, and then I'll have mom or dad get on the phone and say, well, you know, I probably could have been a little kinder somewhere. Dad? Or mom? And that's it. And suddenly, like, we're doing all of this repair work, and I'm getting, you know, because I'm doing parent coach, so I'm getting calls from our family our family reps saying, hey, did you do parent coaching with them? Because they didn't get it. So then we have to go back and go, okay. We have to be willing to look at ourselves too, and to be able to share those things. So Romans 12 really speaks to that. So what this looks like in the brain is this. We have 2 parts of our brain. So the limbic part of our brain is where our emotions happen. And this is also partly where we make decisions, and this is also partly where we store memories, in this limbic part of our brain. The cortex part of our brain is where we do logic, we do reasoning, we make healthy decisions, we do sequencing, these kinds of things. So our cortex is where a lot of our math functioning and our science and things like that. Our limbic brain is what we use when we're going out to have dinner with friends. You know, after we've ordered, right? We had to use our cortex to figure out what we wanted, and we go from there. So the cortical brain and the limbic brain, we have these 2 things. Now here's this amazing thing. This is where the 6-second concept comes in. So when I experience something that stimulates my emotions, my limbic brain kicks in. And I start having this emotion. So I'm angry, I'm happy, I'm sad, whatever, and it starts going, yeah, go, do something. And what they found with research, mapping the brain and things like that, is that the cortex, the cortical part of our brain, takes about 6 seconds to start working after we experience this stimulant. So here's what's crazy about this, is that if we don't, and what this next slide shows is how everything is intertwined, if we don't slow down, if we don't learn how to recognize these emotional spikes, these patterns, that the limbic part of our brain hijacks the cortex, and it doesn't allow it to kick in. If we start acting based on what our limbic brain is telling us, the cortex will not engage to its full level. So the cortex part of our brain that God gave us to help us make wise decisions gets hijacked by the limbic part of our brain. Okay, so this is why Solomon could write about how we have to pursue wisdom. Okay, he didn't, of course, realize it, but he was talking about we have to pursue allowing the cortex of our brain to engage. So we have to learn how to slow down and to think about what we're feeling. Now, sometimes I get students that they're really engaged with this and they love this concept and they're digging along. And other times I go, I don't know, they're looking at me and going, I don't really care. I don't really care about this. This means nothing to me. This looks like science. And so I'll bring them with this concept, and I always get them with this one. Say, so think about this. You were making some very negative choices. That's how you ended up here. Whether they're ready to admit that or not. You were making some choices in your life that were leading to this. For some of you, if you would have just taken 6 seconds, you wouldn't be here. Because you would have made different choices. So you've traded a year of your life at ALA, and you're going to learn things, and it's going to be good, but you traded a year of your life at ALA for 6 seconds. I don't know about you, but that seems like a bad trade. So this matters. I'll tell them sometimes about a story. When I was doing youth ministry, I had several students that graduated from the same high school, and about a month after they graduated, there was a group of students that some parents decided to throw a party, and they had that, you know, if you've ever had this, I'm sorry, I think it's absolutely naive, but they had that really brilliant idea that, you know, we'll let these high school seniors drink alcohol at our house because it'll be our house and it's safe. That's smart, right? And so they were doing this, and there was some students who were ready to go home, and I don't have any idea what the parents were thinking, and I don't, you know, that's whatever. But so they go out and they pile up into a Suburban. There's 7 of them in the car. And the driver is drunk and is flying through a side street in Grosse Pointe, which is a little neighborhood just north of Detroit. And they're flying through Grosse Pointe, and they're going 80 miles an hour in a residential, and they come to where the street splits and has a median, and the driver tries to swerve, doesn't see it at the last minute, ends up rolling and ends up hitting a tree. And 4 of the people that were in the car, of course not the driver, end up dying in this crash. So this is, you know, we're dealing with this, and I had like 6 seniors that had graduated that year from that school, and so got to be part of that grieving process. I'll share that story sometimes and say, you know, we can talk about the effect that alcohol and drugs have on this because it slows it down even more. It makes it more than 6 seconds. We can talk about that, but when you stop and think about this, that driver ended up being charged with 4 felonies. I don't know how the court ended up playing out, but he ended up spending time in jail, and he had to live with for the rest of his life the fact that he killed 4 of his friends. 6 seconds. 6 seconds could have made the difference if he would have just let this cortex part of his brain engage. This stuff matters, and so it's something that we have to pursue. We have to pursue it relentlessly. This is kind of a flow chart that we use to kind of help students understand it sometimes. So up here you have this first piece. Is that what we want to help students do is, as they're learning this process, and obviously you can't do this with every decision, but as they're learning this process, what we want to say is look at your life as if you were looking at it through a video camera. Okay, so kind of try to have a little bit of an out-of-body thinking experience where you can kind of see yourself. And as you see yourself and you're going through, you first identify what are the things that you want. Like, what are the things, being able to just wake up in the day and say, okay, here's the things that I want today. Here's what's going on inside of me. And then sometimes those wants can be triggered by this stimulus that we talk about. And then we have these 3 letters here, T, F, and A. And what we say is that when our students come to us at ALA, they are emotionally fat. And what that means is that F stands for feel, A stands for act, and T stands for think. So emotionally, that's how they operate, is they feel, they act, and then they go, oh, that might not have been a good decision. They'll think about it after the fact or when they're having to deal with the consequences. And what we want to get them to do is to switch that around and to feel and think and then act. Or to think first. Sometimes we can even get them to do that. We can be thinking first as we're feeling and then act. And if we can engage that, then we can get to this consequential thinking process. When this happens, I usually do this. And then we can be able to weigh out, okay, well, what are the costs and what are the benefits of making that decision? And then ultimately come to a conclusion. Now, again, I recognize that in the heat of the moment, they're out with their friends or whatever, they're not going to say, unless they're a C, right? They're not going to say, excuse me for a moment while I go and consider this and, you know, make a chart or whatever. But what we know is that we can help them learn how to do this, and you can help them learn how to do this in a matter of seconds if we model it for them. Right? So if you can recognize in yourself that you can say, I am sometimes emotionally fat, especially when it comes to dealing with my kids. Sometimes that's a big trigger. And if they see that all of the time, they're learning that that's okay. It's reinforcing that that's okay. So we have to engage this too. Sometimes our kids make us mad. Can I get an amen from the church? Right? Sometimes our kids make us mad. I have a redhead also, and she's only 2, and she drives me crazy. I think some of you who have Skype's parent coaching with have seen her. She has this thing. She has this like radar in her that if I'm doing my parent coaching, if I'm talking with you guys from home, she's like, gotta go find Dad because now's the time to bug him. So some of you have heard her, squeal or whatever in the back. Some of you I was at my office, so you never had the chance to see her or hear her. But she drives me crazy sometimes because she is a redhead. She takes after her sister, except she's way more stubborn than her older sister. And so sometimes our kids make us mad. Sometimes I feel anger towards my kids or towards whatever they're doing. But if they see me acting on that anger and then thinking about it, which unfortunately they have seen a few times, or if they see me acting on, because this happens too with good emotions. It's not just bad emotions. Sometimes we get really, really excited and then we do stupid things. Right? Because we're not taking the time to think about it. So they see me get really excited and I go, running around the house and, punching holes in the walls because I'm so excited. I haven't ever done that one, thankfully. Then they do that. As they get a little bit older, if they see, whenever something really good happens to Dad, he gets excited and then he goes out and he buys stuff and then we can't, suddenly we can't ever do anything fun at the end of the month. See, as they get a little bit older, they start to connect these things and they start to see a little bit more. So we want to be able to model this for them. We want to model it for them and then we want to teach it to them over and over and over again. And so sometimes what we do is we go back when a student's made a negative decision here. We'll have them go back and do this. Say, okay, go back and relive this. What happened? What were you wanting because of what the stimulus that had happened? What were you feeling? What could you have thought about? What were your actions? When to be able to recommend this, we'll do this with them sometimes so they can make it. There are lots of different ways to map emotions. Plutchek's is really, really good. What it kind of looks at is this cone of emotions, and what it says is that these things that are, I don't know, this may not have shown up at all on your thing. Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. But these emotions in the center of the circle are like core emotions, is what it would say, and then they kind of flow out from there, sort of following their color patterns that you can see up on the screen. And then the ones that fall in between, so like love, submission, awe, disapproval, remorse, contempt, aggressiveness, and optimism. Those are what we call secondary emotions. And so they will typically flow out of a couple of these things, and there's more choice involved to get to them. So love is more of a choice than it is an emotion. Submission is a choice, it's not an emotion. Awe is a choice, not an emotion. Now, it's closely tied to emotion, and oftentimes it's stimulated or triggered by emotion, but it's more of a decision than an emotion. So this is phase 1, and we always spend more time here because this is where most of your students are, and this is really critical. Because if they get this, they'll buy into the rest of the process. I shouldn't say if. When they get this, they'll buy into the rest of the process. Because it's an amazing, amazing thing. Do you remember the story in John chapter 4 where Jesus meets the woman at the well? She has this emotional intelligence experience. Okay, so here's what this looks like, right? She's coming to the well, and John makes note that she's coming at a time of the day when it was probably the most hot, and there wouldn't have been anybody else there. Because typically, in biblical times, in New Testament times, they would go get well in the early morning before it was hot. They didn't carry it, right? They had to carry a big jar of water or whatever back to their house, or they'd do it in the evening, in the cool of the day, so that they weren't doing it in the hot. She came in the middle of the day at lunchtime when it's hot. Probably, we believe from the rest of the story, that because she didn't want to be around anybody else. So she's coming there, right, and she starts to have this conversation with Jesus. And you notice how she's redirecting, and Jesus then asks her this question of, well, go get your husband. So Jesus knows the answer, right? But she says, go get your husband. And her answer is just like what your teenagers would say. Well, I don't have a husband, right? And the way that your teenagers would say that sort of thing is, well, hey, were you with so-and-so? And then you're thinking in their head, well, technically they were there, but I wasn't actually around them. So no, not at all. I wasn't with them. And then you say, well, that's really funny because I drove by their house and their car was sitting out where you were, so I'm pretty sure they were there. And this is what Jesus does, right? He says, you had 5 husbands or 4 husbands, and now you're living with somebody who's not your husband. Okay, but here's what's amazing with this, and here's what happens. She goes through this thing, and then she goes running back into town. They talk a little bit, right? They have the, are we worshiping in Jerusalem? We're on this mountain, and he says, I'm here, I'm the one. Woo, I'm Jesus. Okay, and so this is good. That was my summary of that, in case you weren't sure. And so then she goes back into town. There's this remarkable verse in John 4 where she says, she starts running around town, and she says, I just met a man who told me everything I've ever done. Now think about that, because the town knows her, right? I mean, it's just like any other small town. When somebody starts doing things and husbands and living, in sin, right? Then everybody knows and they talk about it, they look at you funny and things like that. So she's running around town saying, I'm so excited. I just met a guy who told me, I never met him, and he told me about all the things I've done. You got to imagine they're going, this is not a good thing. This is not a positive moment here. But she's saying, he's told me about all of these things I've done, and come and hear him. And what's really interesting is at the end of the passage it says that many women, or many people in the town believed because of the woman's testimony. It's because of her. And so here's what's cool about this, and this happens with our students, and you're going to have this call or this conversation at some point, where your kid's going to, I think you had this with Candace, you can talk to them about it, because I remember when this happened for her. They finally can answer the question, why did you do that? And it's one of the most liberating things that happens to them. Because most of our students, when they come in, they feel so out of control. They don't know why they're doing what they're doing. They don't know why the spiral is just going down and down and down. And they would love to change it. And they tried really, really hard at home. Whether you could see it or not, they tried at home to fix it. But they couldn't. They didn't know how to explain it. They couldn't get to what was going on underneath. They just tried, and some of them made deals with themselves, and maybe they made deals with you, and some of them, they made deals with God. God, if you'll just make me stop doing this thing, I promise I'll, go do mission work in Africa or something. Like, they'll make these deals, and they just couldn't stop it. And so when they have this moment that they can understand it, and they can explain it to you, they're so excited about it. Mom, Dad, I can explain to you why I used to lie to you. And you're going to go, great! I knew, but it's so exciting for them. It's so liberating that they'll do that. And then as we move into these other phases, they want it. They have this craving for it. I mean, that's the gospel story, right? This is the reason this stuff is cool is because it's based on, gospel truth. That Jesus helps us to see the truth. He is the truth. And then as we see that, we want more and more and more and more and more. Okay, so then the second phase, I have 26 minutes, so we got to go fast. The second phase is about choosing yourself.
You weren't on there by 12.
No, I corrected that. It said 12:15.
Oh,
yeah,
okay,
he
great.
called up. Don't worry. Julie, don't mess with me. Okay.
Sorry.
Never, ever interrupt me. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. All right. So, choosing yourself. You totally messed it up. We're going to be late now.
Shawn, you're the guy that I don't worry about that kind of stuff.
No. Let's just take a break. All right. No, okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Way to try to cover your transgressions with a compliment. Okay, choose yourself is about being more intentional and less reactive. Okay, at home, I felt, I did something, and then I thought about it. We want to change that pattern. Colossians 3, I'm going to read this really, really fast, but this talks about this idea of making this choice. Since then you have been raised with Christ, set your heart on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds, you hear the choice in there? Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things, for you died and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you will also appear with him in glory. Another choice, put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature. These are the things your kids were dealing with. Sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. Because of these things, the wrath of God is coming. You used to live in these ways, in the life you once lived. But now, another action, you must rid yourselves of all such things as these. Here's the other things your kids were dealing with. Anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. Do not, another action, lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge and the image of its creator. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, another action, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive whatever grievances you may have against one another. That's family restoration. Forgive as the Lord forgave you, and over all these virtues, yet one more action, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. And finally, action, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body, you were called to peace. So what we are trying to blend in this in this second phase, in this concept of choosing yourself, is understanding what we do and how we do it, and they have to blend together. Okay? Choosing yourself is about finding the place where those two things come together. That it's not just what you do, and it's not just why you did it. Because sometimes we get off on one extreme or the other, and we start to think, well, it's just what I'm doing, and you deal with that however you deal with it. You know, don't question what I'm doing. I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and you're going to do what you're going to do, and leave me alone. On the other hand, we'll make some really negative decisions, but we'll say, but I did it for the right reasons, Mom and Dad. And I did it because I love my friends. And we'll go, I don't care about your friends. I do care about your friends because Jesus said I have to, but I don't care about your friends. Okay? We want to find the place where our actions and our intentions blend together. So, how do we say good morning to people? How do we talk about a mistake that we've made? How do we start our days? How do we interact with people? We want to find where action and where intention begin to blend together. And so remember here what we're wanting them to do. We want them to have consequential thinking. Okay, we want them to be able to navigate through their emotions, to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, and bringing those things together, and then being able to make those choices, making healthy choices. And that's what Colossians is really, really talking about. That this is a lot about learning to manage the things that are going on beneath the surface. If you think back to the iceberg illustration, if you take an iceberg that's floating, what determines where it goes? Is it what's above the surface? No, of course it's what below the surface. It's acting like a rudder, or it's responding to the currents. That's the part that we want to get them to focus on here. Is it's not just the surface of what you're doing, it's why you're doing it and what you're doing. Bring those two things together, focusing on what's beneath the surface. Okay, the last thing, and then we're going to tie this up with a pretty bow, is give yourself. So giving yourself is about connecting with others in a purposeful and caring way, not choosing just the moment, but choosing your life. And it's beyond just these 6 seconds right now. It's beyond just what comes next. And if you think about your students, and if you think about teenagers in general, most teenagers don't think a lot past today, or maybe tomorrow, or maybe Friday, maybe the weekend, right? If maybe we can get into the weekend. But most teenagers aren't making decisions based on what's going to happen down the road. You know, I've seen a lot of interesting things happen over the last few years with decisions, and especially a couple of areas that have been really interesting to watch, and seeing teenagers and even older teenagers as they react. One of them is social media, and how many people regret something that they've done on social media, and it's had lasting impacts on them. You know, there's stories all the time about people who didn't get jobs because of something that they posted on a social media site, on Facebook or Twitter or something like that. There's talks about people, and I had a student once who had, I don't know, years ago, but it must have been 4 or 5 years ago, had taken some inappropriate pictures of herself and had sent them to somebody, and then she'd moved on and they've moved on, and they're deleted and all that sort of stuff, and then she was dating somebody in college and she was getting ready to get married because and then suddenly these things started popping up again, and now they're having to deal with these things, and it's hurtful and painful, and just the challenge of these things. So we make these decisions as we go. We want to help our students understand that life isn't just about today, that life has a deeper meaning and purpose, and ultimately that's what leadership looks like. Is about being able to understand that and then helping other people to understand that. And it's not just about standing up in front and leading. You know, as we look this afternoon, we talk about our disc, and we'll see that there's these different types of leadership. Every single one of us is gifted and equipped to lead in one way or another, and understanding how to do that. So this decision right here is what gives the other parts of this model their importance and their power. Because if we don't get to the point where we have empathy, we're caring, we're purposeful, it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. If we don't understand the bigger concept, it really doesn't matter. Paul writes this in Philippians: if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, any fellowship with the Spirit, any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, and being one in spirit and in purpose. So do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves, and each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Of course, we know where it goes from there. Christ being very nature. God did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but he made himself nothing, taking on the very nature of a servant. Being made in human appearance, right? We could go on and on and on. We know what that says, okay? But Paul writes this here, and he says, this is what it means to live in community. This is what it means to have a deeper sense of purpose, is to see other people. Of course, tomorrow we're going to talk a lot about this concept of seeing people, as opposed to seeing them as objects. But this is where it starts, is to understand this deeper sense of purpose, that it's bigger than us. This, every conference, I say I'm going to change this. I always forget to go back and do it. This is supposed to be a drop in a pond. It looks like some logo for aerospace or something like that. But this is supposed to be, and you can kind of see it a little bit, right? That our life has these ripple effects beyond what we can do. And then if you have two drops in the pond, that these ripples intersect each other and have an impact on each other. And so your life as mom or dad of your student is having a ripple effect on your kids, and it'll have a ripple effect on their kids, and it has a ripple effect on the other, but then their life is having these same things. And so we're intersecting and we're interacting, and sometimes it goes beyond what we can see. And if you have a still pond, right, and you have a drop in the middle, the ripple effect will go on for a long, long ways. And if you could see really, really closely, you might be talking 12 or 15 or 20 feet where you can still see the impact of that little drop. So this is where we want to start to ask our students. We want to ask you, what is your noble goal? What is it that you're hoping to accomplish with your life? And I guess really when we ask that question, what we're asking them really is, what is God doing through your life? What is going on in your life that God is doing? And how can you bring that out in the way you lead others? When our students get to third phase, we expect them to be leaders. We expect them to be on leadership. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to be running up and down the halls barking about people to get out of bed and do this. Sometimes it is, especially for our Ds. They get amped up about that stuff, right? But there's a lot of other ways to lead, too. Maybe there's better ways to lead, right? Our leadership, how we interact with people and how we lead other people, is about living into this purpose, living into this noble goal, this noble calling for our lives. So we as parents, let's just take a minute here and say, how do I answer that question? What has God called me to? What is this noble purpose that He's put before me? And how am I bringing that out in the way that I lead in my life, in my family, and among my kids? And then let's turn the page and think about this awesome thought. What's it going to look like when your kid gets it? They may not have gotten it yet. They will. What's it going to look like when they get it? So this brings us back to this holistic idea of knowing ourselves and choosing ourselves and giving ourselves. This is what our three phases are. These are the things that we're looking to see in them. These are the things that we want you to be seeing in them. So when you look at, and sometimes we'll talk about it, what does it look like to move from phase 1 to phase 2? What are the things that you want to hear? What are the things you want to see? And understand, too, one of the best parts of our program is the fact that our students are so involved. It's our PPC model. Because our students, and you know this, that I heard a famous speaker say this once, so I feel it was Louis Giglio. I remember who it was. So I can say this, and it's because it's like a tiny bit crass. He says that teenagers today have finely tuned crack detectors. It really, and that's exactly how he said it. That wasn't an edit, but that's how. That they know when things aren't real, and they know it in each other too. And one of the most amazing things that happens, and I'll almost guarantee you this, that if a student doesn't make it in a panel, doesn't advance to the next phase, and they have to come back in 2 weeks and represent, it is almost always because a student says no. It's very rarely that staff says, no, we don't think they're ready. It's almost always the students. Because the students, as they move along and they start to understand this choosing yourself concept, and then they understand this give yourself and this noble goals, they are able to say, look, I'll be your friend, I'll be your bro, if they're guys, right, we can do that, but I'm not going to let you short yourself on this. I know that you don't get this yet. So no, you can't. But the cool thing about this is whenever a student doesn't advance in a panel, they're given something to work on and come back in 2 weeks. We're not just said, hey, if you didn't make it, good luck. We'll see you in a couple weeks. Try to figure it out. They're given something to work on. A lot of times they're given a mentor out of that panel who will say, over the next couple of weeks, we're going to meet, we're going to talk, we're going to really delve into this concept so that you can get it. So that's what we want to see as they're moving along. And then as they're moving into Choose Yourself, do they have that optimism? Are they able to navigate their emotions? And sometimes, I know this may surprise you, sometimes we'll create situations to create some tension for students because it's good for them. Now I don't mean that we, go in and like, I don't know, steal their sheets or something like that and say, what are you going to do now? I mean, it's not like bullying them, but sometimes we'll give them dilemmas. We'll make them wrestle with things. We'll tell them no. Shockingly, right? We'll tell them no about some things, and it's good for them because they have to learn to navigate through these emotions. Again, we're not trying to be mean. We're not trying to set them up, but we don't answer. What we want to make sure we're not doing is taking that helicopter parenting approach, where we're just always telling them what to do, or that drill sergeants who are always rescuing them. We want to let them struggle with it. One of the things that's really interesting is when you have students that have just moved on to second phase, and maybe they're a leader in training now, so they're in leadership now, but they're not in full leadership, so they're in leader in training. One of the things that they really will struggle with is we'll have a new student that comes in. And sometimes, I know this will surprise you, sometimes when new students come in, they don't want to be here. Now, I know that's surprising, but sometimes that's the case, and they will just be absolute jerks, or substitute whatever word you want to there, because it probably fits. And so they'll be mean or angry, or they won't do anything, or whatever. And we'll have sometimes some of our new leaders come to us and say, that student won't do anything, and you need to get involved, to us as staff. And we'll say no. Because you don't want us to run it. They'll all tell you about staff run. And you're asking us to run it. So if you want it, you get the whole thing. Like, we don't just pick and choose, okay, we'll help with this student and we'll run this. No, we're either on student run, student leadership, and you have to solve it. You have to learn how to work with them. And what's the most amazing thing is they move a little bit further along, and now they're on third phase, and they're getting into some of this deeper stuff. How many times a student will say to us, man, I get how my parents felt now. I was really a jerk to them. And yeah, you probably were. Might be something worth talking about at some point with them. So let me leave you with this. I want to show you a little video clip. If it works, let's hope it does. Yes, success. So this is what I don't know if you know this movie, Patch Adams. This is kind of what empathy looks like. This is what we want our students to. Oh, don't adjust. Yeah, there we go. This is the movie Patch Adams. This is a great example of what empathy looks like. This is a great example of what noble goals look like, and about giving yourself up to pursue those things.
Hi. What's your name?
Sorry.
Hi, Cameron. I'm Patch. It's a bit cold. It's not as bad. I want to eat it. It's really. I don't need it. Thanks, hey. Thank you. Looking good. Mind if I sit up?
apologize for the sound getting off a little bit there. Obviously, that you can see what's going on there. So, when we think about this idea of, what does it mean to live with this high level of emotional intelligence? It's not just about fixing behaviors. It's about getting to this deeper sense of purpose. And sometimes, as you can see in that clip, sometimes when we start doing that, those behaviors don't kind of fit what people think is right, but they're right. You watch that, and you go, you can't do that in a hospital, but you can so do that in a hospital. There's no doubt who's right, who's godly. And that's what we want to move